Tonight we step into a frost-hushed village where smoke curls from crooked chimneys and snow piles up in drifts along the timbered cottages. The air is sharp, the kind of cold that freezes your nose hairs and makes you reconsider every life decision that led to you trudging out in it. You walk past a row of straw beehives, those funny little domed skeps, and you can almost feel the tension in the candlemaker's chest as he checks them. If the bees are still alive, spring will bring honey and wax. If not, well, you probably won't survive this winter either, at least not with enough light to see your own fingers. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Now, dim the lights, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You press closer to the hives, and a muffled hum trembles beneath the straw. Bees are still alive in there, clustered tight around their queen, vibrating their wings like tiny space heaters. It's one of nature's oldest survival tricks, buzzing for warmth. You imagine them as little medieval furnace workers, all piled together, determined not to let their world collapse under the ice. The candlemaker strokes the skep gently with mittened hands, almost like you'd pet a sleeping cat, except this cat could sting you to kingdom come if disturbed. In the Middle Ages, bees weren't just insects. They were survival partners, spiritual symbols, and sometimes, accidental freeloaders of gossip. Monks saw them as holy creatures, tiny models of order and obedience. Villagers, on the other hand, worried the bees might sulk if ignored. Whole communities depended on the wax these insects made, because only beeswax candles were pure enough to burn at altars. Tallow, made from animal fat, gave off smoke and stink. Imagine showing up to midnight mass and choking on the smell of burning mutton fat, not exactly uplifting. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Medieval church councils actually required beeswax candles in many rituals. The clean, bright flame was thought to honor God more fittingly than any smelly tallow substitute. That meant candlemakers and beekeepers alike were under constant pressure to keep hives alive, even when winter tried its best to snuff them out. And here's a quirky tidbit. People sometimes believed bees could predict the weather. If a hive was unusually quiet before autumn ended, villagers muttered that a brutal winter was coming. If the bees kept flying late into the year, maybe the frost would hold off. Spoiler: medieval weather forecasting via bee gossip was about as reliable as shaking a magic 8-ball. You picture the candlemaker pacing by his skeps, snow crunching beneath his boots, the torchlight catching on his frosted beard. He has to believe the bees will make it through, because without them, his workshop will fall silent. No wax means no candles. No candles mean no church contracts, no coins jingling in his pouch, no food on the table. And you thought your job reviews were stressful. Historians still argue whether ordinary villagers in every region truly treated bees with elaborate rituals, talking to them, sharing secrets, or even dressing in black at funerals so the bees wouldn't feel excluded. Some accounts insist this was widespread across Europe, while others suggest it was only a quirky local custom. Either way, the belief shows how people blurred the line between animal and community member. Picture it: a candlemaker trudges home, frost glittering in his hair, and pauses at the hive to murmur the day's events. The baker's daughter wed today. Don't be jealous. You'll get your honey cakes in spring. Maybe he chuckles at himself, maybe he doesn't. But in the silence of snow-blanketed fields, it feels safer to keep the bees in the loop. You can almost smell the cold air, tinged with wood smoke and the faint, sweet memory of honey that lingers around the hive. The straw walls creak slightly under the weight of frost. Inside, the bees huddle tighter, expending their precious stores of honey. Every drop counts. Every flicker of warmth decides whether this hive will thrive when the thaw comes. Meanwhile, the candlemaker glances toward his workshop. On the bench sit leftover scraps of beeswax, hardened into yellow lumps. They smell faintly of summer meadows, a memory pressed into solid form. Soon, he'll melt those scraps and stretch them into candles, hoping the supply lasts until spring. But no matter how careful he is, the real question hangs heavy. Will his bees survive the winter storms to give him more wax next year? And you, standing there, feel the strange companionship of a creature you can't even see right now. The bees are hidden, invisible in their hive, but their survival is your survival. It's a fragile bond, one you'll be following closely as the nights grow longer and the snow piles higher. You follow the candle maker into his dim little workshop, the air heavy with the mingled scents of wax, wood shavings, and faint smoke from the hearth. On the table lies a squat clay pot half filled with honey, golden, viscous, almost glowing in the torchlight. It looks like treasure, and in the Middle Ages, it practically was. Honey wasn't just a sweet treat, it was currency, medicine, and spiritual offering all rolled into one. You dip a fingertip into your imagination and taste it rich, floral, cloyingly sweet. It coats your tongue in a way sugar never could, because refined sugar won't trickle into Europe until centuries later. If you wanted something sweet in the medieval world, it came from bees, full stop. That means every ounce of honey carried the weight of scarcity. One hive could produce 10, maybe 20 pounds in a good year. That's not much when you're dividing it between a household, a church, and a hungry lord demanding taxes. Here's the mainstream fact: honey was so prized that some medieval lords required it as a form of rent. Instead of paying coins, tenants might hand over buckets of honey or carefully mold wax cakes. Sweetness was literally a tax. Imagine your landlord today asking for a gallon of maple syrup instead of rent. Quirky, yes, but also kind of tasty. And here's your fringe tidbit: some thieves specialized in honey raids. Under cover of darkness, they'd sneak into an apiary, snatch combs, or even entire skeps, and vanish into the woods. Getting caught could mean a whipping or worse, because stealing honey wasn't just theft, it was like robbing someone of light, medicine, and food all at once. You'd be better off swiping a loaf of bread than a honeycomb. The candle maker knows this well. He eyes the pot on his bench with suspicion, as though it might walk away on its own. To protect his stores, he hides the jars deep in his cellar, tucked between salted pork and sacks of barley. And he's not wrong to worry, neighborly disputes sometimes erupted over missing honey. Historians still argue whether medieval communities exaggerated such tales to teach moral lessons, or if honey theft really was that rampant. Either way, you wouldn't want to get stung by both bees and justice. Now, beyond sweetness, honey had a more serious role. Apothecaries praised it as a healing salve. You smear a little on a wound, and suddenly it's fighting infection, thanks to natural antibacterial properties nobody back then could name but everybody respected. A sore throat. Honey water. Digestive troubles. Honey wine, also known as mead. Low spirits in the dead of winter. Mead again, but with a wink and a second cup. The candle maker dabbles too, though he's not a doctor. His wife saves a spoonful here and there for coughs, mixes it with herbs when their child has a fever. Honey is their pharmacy in a jar. You can almost see the glint in her eyes as she measures out a spoonful, knowing it might heal, but also knowing every spoon means one less candle by spring. Let's pause for a joke. If medieval honey really was liquid gold, then bees were basically running the inflation rate. You think housing prices are bad? Try paying your feudal dues in honey when a cold spring wipes out half the blossoms. Still, the candle maker's focus stays on wax. Honey feeds the body, but wax feeds the soul, or at least the rituals of it. Churches demand candles. Lords demand candles. Weddings and funerals demand candles. But no one can make bees' produce without leaving them enough honey to survive the cold. Every dip of the ladle into that clay pot feels like a gamble with the hive's life. Outside, the wind rattles the shutters. You imagine the bees still huddled tight, sipping from their own golden reserves while humans downstairs squabble over jars. It's a strange parallel economy. Upstairs, honey is hoarded, traded, and taxed. Inside the hive, it's consumed in quiet desperation, drop by drop, to keep wings alive. The candle maker sighs. He's already given some honey to the parish priest, because refusing would mean more than a stern lecture. The priest claimed it was for medicinal use, though you can bet a few spoonfuls sweetened the rectory's mead jug. A little cynicism survives even in medieval piety. You glance around the workshop again. Jars glisten like captured sunlight, wax lumps gleam like butter left in the cold. You realize honey wasn't just food here. It was power. To control honey was to control sweetness, medicine, and a kind of currency that didn't tarnish or rust. That's why beekeeping mattered as much as farming fields of grain. And in that candle maker's careful gaze, you see both reverence and worry. Reverence for the miracle of honey, worry for the hive's fragile survival. One hard winter could wipe it all away. One greedy hand could steal a season's worth of sweetness. And yet, when spring comes, if the bees endure, the world will taste golden again. You leave the jars of honey behind and let your gaze drift toward the shelves stacked with candles, some stubby and uneven, others long and smooth, their pale wax catching the torchlight. You pick one up and notice it's different from the smoky tallow candles that peasants burn in their cottages. This one is beeswax, clean, bright, and faintly scented with summer fields. No animal fat reek, no greasy soot. Just a steady flame that burns with surprising clarity, almost like a miniature sun brought indoors. In medieval Europe, this difference mattered. Churches demanded beeswax candles for every service, especially during grand ceremonies. The wax was thought to symbolize purity, since it came from creatures who themselves seemed mysterious and disciplined. The flame stood as Christ's light, and the lack of smoke helped keep the holy space from choking with fumes. A grand cathedral glowing with hundreds of beeswax candles wasn't just impressive, it was essential. You wouldn't want a bishop sneezing his way through mass because some penny-pinching supplier slipped in tallow. Here's your mainstream fact. In 12th century England, the Catholic Church decreed that only beeswax could be used on altars. This wasn't just snobbery, it was theology and symbolism wrapped together. Wax equaled sacredness. Tallow equaled common use. A line was drawn in flickering firelight. Now for a quirky tidbit, not everyone could afford beeswax candles. Ordinary folk often saved them for special occasions, like weddings, christenings, or, ironically enough, funerals. One of the strangest customs involved putting a beeswax candle in the hands of the dying, the flame meant to light their soul on its way out. Talk about carrying a torch into the afterlife. You watch the candle maker dip a wick into molten wax, draw it out slowly, and hang it to cool before dipping again. The process takes patience, layer after layer, building up the candle until it holds its shape. His hands are steady, practiced. This is his livelihood, but also a kind of devotion. Every candle he crafts might burn at an altar, a wedding feast, or even beside a sickbed where someone whispers their last words. Historians still argue whether medieval people truly thought of candlelight as divine in itself, or whether they simply liked the practical, smoke-free glow. Some sources gush about the symbolism, while others suggest most folks just wanted a decent light to read their psalters by. Maybe the truth lies somewhere between, reverence wrapped in utility. The candle maker doesn't think too hard about theology. He knows only this wax from his hives will buy him bread and keep his name respected. He hands over finished candles to merchants who load them into carts, bound for city markets. A few weeks later, his handiwork flickers in cathedral naves, illuminating stone saints and gilded icons. That connection, the hum of his bees in winter leading to holy light months later, is the invisible thread of his life. And here's a modern aside for you. Imagine if your survival job today doubled as your spiritual contribution to society. It's like if Starbucks baristas were the only ones allowed to brew communion wine. Suddenly, every latte carries a cosmic weight. That's what beeswax meant for candle makers. You step closer and feel the heat from the melting pot. Wax bubbles gently, and the air smells faintly sweet. He lifts another wick, dips, lifts, dips again, until the candle grows thick and straight. The rhythm is hypnotic, like the bees' hum you heard earlier. Work, layer, pause. Work, layer, pause. Candle making isn't glamorous, but it's steady, and in that steadiness lies survival. In the corner, scraps of tallow sit neglected. He keeps them for poorer customers, peasants who can't afford the luxury of beeswax. Those candles sputter, smoke, and leave greasy streaks on walls. But the beeswax ones? They burn longer, cleaner, and fetch a far higher price. He knows where his priorities lie. A child toddles in, holding a stub of candle no bigger than his thumb. He giggles when it drips hot wax onto his hand and squeals at the sting. The candle maker scolds him, but quietly smiles. Wax is dangerous and precious all at once, hot enough to burn, rare enough to guard, sacred enough to carry prayers into heaven. You glance back at the skeps outside, buried in snow, and marvel at the link. Those tiny buzzing insects, tucked tight for warmth, are the quiet architects of all this holy fire. Without them, the cathedrals would darken, weddings would lose their glow, and villagers would stumble through nights guided only by smoky tallow. The bees are hidden, but their work shines in every flame. So when the candle maker lifts a newly finished candle, holds it to the torch, and watches it burn clean and steady, you sense his relief. His livelihood endures. His faith, whether in God, the bees, or simple human stubbornness, endures too. And for tonight, at least, the world glows a little brighter. You crunch back outside into the snow, where the candle maker's hives sit in neat rows. At first glance they look like giant overturned baskets, their straw domes frosted white, a faint steam rising when the sun dares to peek through the clouds. These are skeps, the medieval bee homes. Simple, practical, and oddly charming, like something you'd expect a child to weave for a giant's dollhouse. Each skep is made of coiled straw, wound tight like a spring and stitched together with bramble thorns or bits of twine. The gaps are daubed with mud, clay, or even cow dung to keep out wind and rain. Not glamorous, but hey, when your whole family is crammed into a straw dome for the winter, you stop fussing about the decor. You lean close and hear faint buzzing within, a reminder that warmth and life still hide under layers of ice. Here's your mainstream fact. Skeps were the dominant hive type in medieval Europe for centuries, long before wooden box hives with removable frames came along in the 19th century. They worked well for collecting honey and wax, but there was a brutal catch: you usually had to destroy the hive to harvest the combs. Bees survived only if you spared a skep or two, which made winter survival all the more critical. Now for a quirky tidbit. Some skeps were given tiny thatch roofs of sticks or tiles to keep the rain off. Imagine little bee cottages complete with miniature hats. It's equal parts adorable and practical, though the bees probably weren't too impressed by the architectural flourish. The candle maker crouches beside one skep, brushing off snow with a stiff glove. He runs his hand along the straw coils, testing their strength. Weak skeps collapse under heavy frost, leaving the bees exposed. If that happens, he'll lose not just honey and wax, but a year's work. You can almost feel his pulse quicken as he presses his ear against the dome, listening for that comforting murmur. Historians still argue whether all peasants had access to skeps, or if they were mostly the property of wealthier villagers and monasteries. Some accounts suggest every smallholder might keep a skep or two, while others claim it was a specialized trade too expensive for the average farmer. Either way, whoever owned skeps held a kind of power, light and sweetness in a world often starved of both. The candle maker's own skeps are patched with scraps of cloth and hardened clay. They're not pretty, but they're sturdy enough. You picture him in autumn, twisting straw with aching fingers, weaving tighter and tighter circles until the dome took shape. It's slow work, not unlike dipping candles, monotonous, repetitive, but strangely meditative. A skep wasn't just a bee house, it was a lifeline, woven by hand to shelter thousands of buzzing workers. And here's a modern aside: imagine if your entire internet connection depended on a basket you made yourself. If one snowstorm tore it apart, no more Netflix. That's the medieval skep for you, an all-or-nothing survival tool disguised as rustic decor. The child from earlier toddles out with a little stick, tapping at the nearest hive until his father shoos him away with a sharp word. Bees disturbed in winter won't emerge to sting, they're too cold for that, but each rattle wastes their energy. They huddle tighter, buzzing harder, burning through precious honey stores. Every wasted calorie now could mean death before spring. The candle maker knows this, which is why he checks his skeps gently, muttering a quick prayer as he does. His breath fogs the cold air, his words barely louder than the hum within. Stay with me. Just a few months more. He isn't just talking to bees, of course. He's talking to his own survival, his family's future, his fragile livelihood. Without these woven domes, his workshop would sit empty, his shelves bare, his pockets light. The skeps are more than straw and mud, they're promises stitched together, holding against the weight of winter snow. You step back, looking down the line of frosted domes. Each one is a tiny fortress, buzzing with life unseen. And you realize the candle maker's craft doesn't begin in his workshop, with hot wax and dipping wicks. It begins here, in the cold, with a basket of straw and the stubborn will of bees. You stand with the candle maker at the edge of his yard as autumn shrinks into winter. The leaves are gone, the fields lie bare, and the air tastes metallic, the way it does before the first heavy snow. He knows the bees won't last long without help. This is the moment when winter preparations begin, the quiet, anxious labor that decides whether his hives survive until spring. He starts by stacking bundles of straw against the skeps, like little blankets to block the drafts. Some beekeepers pile dung or clay around the bases too, anything to keep the wind from sneaking in and chilling the cluster. It isn't glamorous, but neither is freezing to death in a straw hut. He pats the mound with his hands, nodding to himself as if tucking the bees in for bed. Here's your mainstream fact: medieval beekeepers often harvested honey in late summer, then deliberately left behind part of the comb to feed the bees through winter. If they got greedy and took too much, the colony starved. That delicate balance between human appetite and insect survival was a yearly gamble. And here's your quirky tidbit: some people whispered charms or even sang lullabies to their bees while preparing the hives for winter. A rhyme, a blessing, a murmured promise, it was thought to keep the insects content, as though they understood human comfort. You can almost picture a candle maker crooning to his hive like a medieval bedtime story. Sleep tight, little bees, don't let the frost bite. You watch him scoop out a small comb, leaving the rest untouched. The golden cells glisten, heavy with honey, but he forces himself to resist. Every drop taken now is one less breath of warmth for the bees later. He chews the wax absent-mindedly, savoring its sweetness while muttering about how priests and lords take their share without ever weaving a skep or nursing a hive. His grumble drifts into the cold air, carried away like smoke. Historians still argue whether winterizing hives was standardized across regions or more of a personal improvisation. Some evidence suggests monasteries developed precise methods, covering skeps with special cloaks, rationing feed carefully, while peasants relied on whatever scraps they had on hand. Either way, every keeper lived with the same gnawing doubt: had they done enough? The candle maker isn't taking chances. He sprinkles ash around the hive bases to deter ants and mice. He checks for cracks in the straw, pressing mud into the seams. He even lays planks angled above some skeps like makeshift roofs, hoping to keep snow from piling too high. All of this, just so a cluster of insects no bigger than a handful of figs might survive the howling storms. And here's a modern aside. Imagine if keeping your phone charged required wrapping it in straw and singing to it on cold nights. You'd never look at your gadgets the same way again. As the sky darkens, he strikes flint to torch, the flames reflecting in his tired eyes. He glances at the skeps one last time and mutters, "That should do." The bees, silent to his ears, vibrate quietly inside, producing heat as they've done for millennia. Tiny wing muscles work like hidden hearths, turning honey into warmth. It's an invisible fire, sustained by sacrifice, both theirs and his. The candlemaker's wife calls him inside, but he lingers. He presses a hand to the straw dome, just for a heartbeat, as if exchanging warmth with the creatures inside. His breath clouds in the night air. He knows winter is coming fast, and soon enough, the snow will bury these hives. But tonight, at least, he's done what he can. The snow has come, thick and heavy, muffling the village like a woolen cloak. You trudge alongside the candle maker through the powder, your boots squeaking with every step, until he stops near the hives. The skeps are half buried now, their straw tops peeking like round helmets out of white drifts. He doesn't just check for frost, he leans close, cups his hands, and begins to whisper. "Not to you. To the bees." You tilt your head, thinking he's lost it, but no. This is a custom older than memory, speaking to bees as though they're members of the household. The candle maker tells them about his day, his wife's chores, his son's mischief, the gossip in the tavern. It's a one-sided conversation, but he believes it matters. If the bees feel ignored, the hive may grow restless, sullen, even doomed. Here's your mainstream fact. Across Europe, the tradition of telling the bees was recorded well into the 19th century. People informed their hives of births, deaths, marriages, even major news, convinced the bees needed inclusion or they might desert the keeper. And here's a quirky tidbit. At funerals, some villagers draped hives in black cloth so the bees could mourn alongside the family. Neglecting to do so risked losing the hive entirely, as though the insects were insulted at being left out of the grieving process. Imagine wrapping your Wi-Fi router in a little black veil whenever a relative passes. The candle maker finishes his whispering and straightens up. His voice is low, his tone gentle, as if soothing a child. He's not alone in this practice, his neighbors do it too, even if they pretend otherwise in broad daylight. Some even knock politely on the hive before sharing their news, a bizarre blend of courtesy and superstition. Historians still argue whether this ritual began as a Christianized custom or if it has pagan roots, tied to ancient beliefs about animals as spiritual messengers. Was it theology, folklore, or simply a clever way to remind beekeepers to pay attention to their hives? The debate lingers like the hum under the straw. You notice the candle maker's wife standing nearby, holding a basket. She joins in, telling the bees about the village's latest wedding. Her words puff into the frozen air, dissolving like smoke. Their son pipes up too, though his news is mostly about how he lost a mitten. The family laughs softly, the sound blending with the faint buzz within. It's a strange family portrait, humans and insects bound together by whispered words. And here's a modern aside. Think about how we talk to pets today, explaining our plans to dogs or cats as if they care. Medieval folks just extended the courtesy to their bees, creatures that, unlike your cat, at least repay you with honey instead of hairballs. The candle maker kneels, brushing snow from one skep. He murmurs, "Stay warm, my little friends." His tone is reverent, almost prayerful. For him, superstition and survival overlap until they're indistinguishable. He doesn't care whether scholars will one day scoff. All he knows is that his bees listen, and listening might mean they'll live. The wind howls, tugging at his cloak, rattling the bare trees. He straightens, exhales, and trudges back toward the cottage, leaving behind the hives, snug in their snowy cloaks, and the faint echo of words spoken to keep winter at bay. The next morning dawns grey and bitter, the sort of cold that makes your eyelashes feel like icicles. The candle maker hurries out with a clay dish in his hands, steam curling from its surface. Today isn't about checking skeps or whispering gossip, it's feeding day. The bees, tucked tight in their frosty domes, need a little help to make it through the long freeze. He crouches near one hive, lifts the woven straw carefully, and slips the dish inside. What's in it? Not honey, he dares not raid their stores now. Instead, it's a strange concoction, a hardened cake of boiled sugar, sometimes mixed with ground herbs or spices. Other keepers stir mead-like brews, watered down and poured in shallow bowls. It's survival rations, medieval style, and every crumb counts. Here's your mainstream fact. Beekeepers across Europe often supplemented their hives with sugar, honey water, or even bread soaked in ale to keep colonies alive when natural stores ran low. While bees are famously good at hoarding, a poor summer or greedy harvest left them short. And here's a quirky tidbit. Some candle makers swore by feeding their bees warmed beer infused with herbs. Keeps them lively, one old text suggests. You imagine tipsy bees stumbling around the hive, buzzing louder than usual, tiny drunkards waiting for spring. The candle maker watches as the bees stir sluggishly, creeping toward the sugary offering. Their movements are slow, deliberate, almost drowsy. They lap at the cake, their little bodies trembling as they draw in precious energy. It's like watching the world's tiniest tavern at closing time. Historians still argue whether these feeding methods were genuinely effective or more placebo for the keeper's conscience. Did sugared cakes really save colonies, or did the strongest hives survive regardless? Some sources suggest feeding bees might even spread disease if the food spoiled. Still, in the cold silence of winter, doing something always feels better than doing nothing. You kneel closer, and the hum of wings brushes your ears. The bees are alive, moving, surviving. For the candle maker, it's relief wrapped in worry. He'll have to check again tomorrow, and the next day, and again after the next storm. The balance is constant, too much food, and he wastes his supplies, too little, and the hive collapses. And here's a modern aside. Imagine babysitting a tiny city where everyone is starving, and the only grocery store is you spooning sugar through the roof. That's medieval beekeeping in a nutshell. The child from earlier trots out, clutching a crust of bread. Before his father can stop him, he crumbles it onto the hive entrance, announcing proudly that he's feeding the bees. The candle maker sighs but leaves it. Who knows? Maybe the bees appreciate a snack from their smallest caretaker. The snow swirls heavier as he finishes, piling up against the skeps. He presses the straw lids back down, pats the tops gently, and whispers another blessing. The hives fall silent again, but inside, you know the bees are working, their tiny tongues sticky with sugar, their bodies vibrating to stay warm. You step back, watching as he trudges toward his workshop, dish in hand, breath puffing in white clouds. The bees, drunk on sweetness and determination, buzz faintly in their straw domes. Winter rages, but for now, they endure, fed by the hand of the man who depends on them most. Snow muffles the village into silence, but behind tall monastery walls, life hums with quiet purpose. You step into the cloister gardens, where robed monks move slowly along rows of skeps, their hoods dusted with frost. Here, beekeeping isn't just a side hustle, it's a discipline, a form of patience stitched into daily prayer. The monks bend low, checking straw domes, brushing away snow with mittened hands. Unlike the candle maker's rough patches of mud and ash, these hives look almost regal, capped with neat wooden boards to shield them from rain. Every skep is aligned in perfect order, as though bees appreciate symmetry as much as God does. Here's your mainstream fact. Monasteries were some of the most skilled beekeepers of the Middle Ages. They maintained large apiaries to supply wax for churches, honey for medicine, and mead for feasts. Their records, carefully written in scriptoria, became some of the earliest guides to beekeeping. And here's a quirky tidbit. In some monasteries, novices weren't allowed near the bees until they'd proven themselves obedient. Bees were considered holy teachers of discipline, their ordered colonies reflecting the proper order of monastic life. Imagine getting scolded by your abbot because a swarm thought you lacked humility. The monk nearest you leans in and whispers, not unlike the candle maker did, but his words are scripture. He quotes Psalms, weaving the hum of bees into the rhythm of prayer. For him, the hive is a choir, each buzz another note in God's hymn. You can almost hear it, a faint harmony beneath the chant. Historians still argue whether monks truly believed bees had divine qualities, or if this was poetic metaphor used to justify their practical value. After all, wax lit the chapels, honey sweetened fasting days, and mead kept spirits warm in winter. Spiritual or not, the bees paid the bills. You watch as the monks lift a small wooden cover and slip in a bowl of honey water. The bees stir sluggishly, crawling toward the sweetness. The monk crosses himself, then lowers the cover again. His movements are slow, deliberate, more like ritual than labor. And here's a modern aside. Think of this as the medieval version of IT maintenance. Bees were the servers, wax was the data, and the monks were the patient sysadmins keeping everything from crashing. Except instead of error codes, they got stung. The abbot strolls by, nodding at the careful work. He knows these hives are gold, literal and spiritual. The wax will burn at Easter, the honey will heal the sick, and the mead will flow on feast days. The bees, buzzing unseen inside their straw domes, sustain an entire community. You glance up at the monastery windows glowing faintly with candlelight. Inside, other brothers copy texts, study scripture, or sing their evening chants. Out here, these monks labor with buzzing insects instead of quills, but the devotion feels the same. Patience, repetition, faith all bound together in the hum of a hive. The candle maker you've been following would envy this place. His patched skeps lean against bare fences, while these stand in ordered rows beneath the protection of holy walls. Yet both man and monk depend on the same fragile creatures, the same invisible warmth inside the straw domes. As you leave the apiary, the sound of chanting drifts over the snow. You realize the monks see no difference between prayer and work. To tend bees in winter is to guard light for the world. To whisper to hives is to trust that spring will come. And in the silence of the cloister garden, you feel that trust humming with every wing beat. The wind howls tonight, rattling shutters and hurling flakes against the workshop walls. You step inside, grateful for the thick smell of wax and the soft glow of candles dripping their light across every surface. The candle maker sits hunched at a low bench, his hands blackened with soot and sticky with resin. He isn't working on bees right now, he's working on their homes. A cracked skep lies in front of him, its straw edges frayed, its frame half collapsed from damp and snow. He presses fresh rye straw into shape, coiling it carefully and binding it with thin strips of bramble. His movements are precise, the same way you might wrap cords around a phone charger when you know the wire's about to give out. A mistake here means cold wind in the hive, and cold wind means death. Here's your mainstream fact: medieval skeps weren't permanent. They often lasted only a few seasons before moisture and weather broke them down. Beekeepers spent winter nights repairing and replacing hives, weaving straw with willow or hazel rods. The process was part craft, part survival. Now, for a quirky tidbit, some candle makers stuffed bits of cow dung into the cracks of worn skeps, claiming it kept out drafts better than mud. Imagine proudly showing your neighbor your fine handiwork. Yes, that hive is insulated with premium cow pie, thank you very much. The man hums as he works, candlelight throwing shadows across his tired face. Around him are tools scattered in organized chaos: awls, knives, scraps of straw, bundles of reeds. He's more artisan than farmer tonight, stitching together a vessel for a kingdom of bees. Historians still argue whether such winter repairs were more symbolic than practical. After all, bees cluster in the hive's center, generating their own heat. Did patching every draft truly help, or was it more about giving the keeper peace of mind during long, powerless nights? No thermostat back then, just superstition and hope woven into straw. He pauses, wiping his hands on his apron, then leans back to inspect his work. A child creeps in quietly, carrying a bent candle for light. The boy squints at the half-finished skep and asks if it will be strong enough for the bees when spring comes. The candle maker ruffles his hair and says, "Stronger than us, perhaps." And here's a modern aside. Think of this like upgrading your Wi-Fi router in the dead of winter, convinced it'll fix your streaming problems, when in reality, the real issue is your entire village runs on medieval broadband. The candle maker patches straw, and you patch Reuters. Both are rituals of hope. The man takes a last bundle of straw, twisting and tucking it until the skep looks whole again. He runs his hand over the surface, testing for gaps, and then sets it beside the fire to dry. Tomorrow, if the storm breaks, he'll carry it out to the apiary and swap it for one that's falling apart. For now, though, he leans back, staring at the ceiling beams while the candle beside him gutters low. His shoulders slump. Repairing skeps is tedious, endless, but also meditative. Each coil reminds him of spring, of buzzing fields, of honey running golden once more. The work holds him steady against the storm. You watch as the candles burn shorter, dripping wax down the rough wooden table, and the repaired skep waits by the fire like a promise. Outside, the blizzard rages, but inside this little workshop, hope is bound tightly with straw, reed, and patience. The storm clears, leaving a thin crust of ice that crunches under your boots as you walk back out to the hives. The world sparkles with a brittle beauty, sunlight bouncing off frozen drifts. But your attention isn't on the glitter, it's on the tiny domes of straw sitting motionless, like snow-capped tombs. You know the candle maker worries every time silence stretches too long. He kneels by one skep and leans in, his ear pressed against the woven wall. At first, nothing. Only the sound of his own breath fogging the air. Then, there it is. A low, trembling vibration, faint but unmistakable. The bees are alive, their bodies quivering in unison to keep their cluster warm. It's less a hum than a heartbeat, pulsing through the straw. Here's your mainstream fact. Honeybees survive winter by forming a living ball inside their hive. They shiver their flight muscles to generate heat, keeping the queen at the warm center. This winter cluster can hold steady at around 90 degrees Fahrenheit, even when the world outside is frozen. And now the quirky tidbit. Some medieval beekeepers believed bees huddled together not for warmth, but because they were praying. Their quiet vibration was taken as a kind of murmured chant, a holy hymn offered to God through the darkest months. Imagine assigning religious devotion to every insect wiggle. It does give buzzing a more spiritual vibe. The candle maker closes his eyes, listening intently. He knocks gently on the skep, then waits. The hum intensifies slightly, a restless ripple as the bees acknowledge the disturbance. Reassured, he nods, like a doctor checking a pulse. Historians still argue whether keepers could truly interpret hive sounds with accuracy, or whether much of it was guesswork and superstition. Some records describe men claiming to hear sickness in the hive, diagnosing trouble by the pitch of the buzz. Whether accurate or not, listening became a ritual of care, a way to feel close to the invisible swarm inside. You lean in too, ear brushing against the straw, and you swear you hear it, the faint, rhythmic chorus of thousands of tiny lives clinging together. It's strangely intimate, like eavesdropping on a secret world. And here's a modern aside, think of it as a medieval ultrasound. No screens, no machines, just putting your ear against the belly of the hive and hoping for signs of life. If you heard buzzing, you relaxed. If not, well, time to panic. The candle maker moves from skep to skep, repeating the ritual. Sometimes he smiles faintly at the hum, sometimes his brows knit with worry when the sound is too soft. At one hive he lingers longer, tapping the wall, whispering words of encouragement. The bees answer with a faint rustle, and he exhales as though he's been holding his breath all morning. By the time he's finished, the sun has slid low, casting the hives in long shadows. The candle maker straightens slowly, brushing snow from his knees. His work has yielded no honey, no wax, no immediate profit, but still, he looks relieved. His treasure is alive, tucked deep within straw and frost. You turn your head, and for a moment the entire field feels alive with hidden murmurs. A dozen hives, each one vibrating softly in its secret warmth, each one a world within a world. The bees do not sleep, they endure. And as you step back from the apiary, you can't help but feel their hum still reverberating faintly in your own chest. A few days later, the sun peeks out weakly, and the snow softens into slush. The candle maker trudges out again, basket on his arm, this time not with sugar cakes but with little bundles of dried leaves, bark, and roots. He isn't feeding the bees now, he's fumigating. He kneels by a skep, sets down a small clay pot, and lights a twist of smoldering herbs. Smoke curls upward, fragrant and sharp. The bees stir inside, restless, but not panicked. He waves the smoke gently toward the entrance, as though lulling them into calm. Here's your mainstream fact. Medieval beekeepers often used smoke to quiet or pacify bees during inspections. They burned dried fungi, herbs, or wood shavings, letting the smoke mask alarm pheromones and ease the swarm. Though simple, this method is still used by modern apiarists, though now it involves a shiny metal smoker instead of a clay pot. Now the quirky tidbit. Some beekeepers swore that burning cow dung created the best smoke, thick, steady, and oddly soothing to the hive. Yes, apparently even bees had a taste for farmyard fragrance. Imagine advertising premium dung smoke as the medieval tool of choice. The candle maker doesn't laugh, though. His face is serious, eyes narrowed as he watches the stream of smoke drift. For him, this isn't just pest control or inspection prep, it's ritual. He mutters a few words under his breath, half prayer, half habit, while the bees buzz faintly within. Historians still argue whether fumigation in winter was meant more to protect against pests or simply to reassure keepers that the hive was alive and responsive. Some suggest it was even symbolic, with the rising smoke echoing incense offered in church. Was it medicine for bees, or medicine for human anxiety? The smoke thickens, filling the air with a resinous scent. You breathe it in, and it's oddly calming, like incense clinging to cathedral stones. The bees respond with a low buzz, not aggressive, just restless enough to prove their presence. And here's your modern aside. Think of this like the medieval version of turning the Wi-Fi off and back on again. Smoke was the reset button. It didn't solve every problem, but it usually calmed things enough to carry on. The child from earlier peers out from behind a fence, nose wrinkling at the smell. He whispers that it stinks worse than the pigsty. The candle maker chuckles softly but doesn't stop. He knows that in this smoky haze lies a measure of protection against predators, against bad luck, against the terrifying possibility of opening a hive to find silence. By the time he finishes fumigating, the sun has dipped low again, glowing orange against the snowy fields. The hives stand wreathed in the last wisps of smoke, their inhabitants alive, humming faintly, subdued but safe. You step back, the scent lingering in your clothes, and realize something. This strange ritual, half science and half superstition, has carried from medieval fields all the way to modern backyards. The tools have changed, but the need is the same, keeping tiny, furious insects calm enough to survive, and keeping anxious humans calm enough to believe in spring. The cold deepens again, and with it come new threats, not storms this time, but opportunists. You find the candle maker trudging out at dawn, shovel in hand, eyes darting toward the hedgerow. He isn't just checking hives. He's on patrol. Winter doesn't just starve bees, it draws out scavengers. A fox noses around one skep, sniffing for the faint smell of honey. Ravens perch nearby, cocking their heads, ready to jab beaks through weak straw. Even mice, clever little thieves, wriggle into hives for warmth and a sugary feast. To the bees, these are monsters. To the candle maker, they're competitors. Here's your mainstream fact. Medieval records mention a constant battle between beekeepers and hive raiders, birds, rodents, even bears. Wax, honey, and warmth made hives irresistible, especially in lean winters. Fences, traps, and watchful eyes were as important as feeding. And here's a quirky tidbit. Some beekeepers swore by hanging dried fish heads near their hives, claiming the stench scared off birds and beasts alike. You picture a row of smelly trophies swaying in the cold wind. Effective, maybe, but not exactly Instagram-ready decor. The candle maker circles his hives, stamping snow with deliberate steps, as if leaving human tracks will make intruders wary. He inspects the straw walls for gnaw marks, the snow for tiny paw prints. At one hive, he finds a hole chewed clean through. His jaw tightens. He patches it with mud and curses under his breath, promising vengeance on whichever mouse dared invade. Historians still argue whether protective measures like fences and charms were effective, or whether keepers exaggerated the danger to dramatize their role as guardians. After all, some hives may have simply died from cold or hunger, and blaming a fox was easier than admitting defeat. The child follows, carrying a stick longer than himself. He brandishes it at a crow that flaps overhead, shouting like a pint-sized knight defending a fortress. The crow laughs in bird language and flits away, but the boy grins proudly, convinced he has saved the bees. And here's your modern aside. Think of this like running antivirus software on your laptop. Most days, it's just paranoia, but once in a while it stops a disaster. Medieval beekeepers were basically installing Scarecrow 1.0 against the viruses of fur and feather. By midday, the candle maker has reinforced the hives with fresh mud, set out a few crude snares, and even scattered ashes around the bases to mask scents. He squats by the final skep, presses his palm against it, and mutters, "Safe now." Whether he means for the bees or for himself, you can't be sure. As the sun fades, the apiary feels like a guarded camp, each hive a fortress under siege. The bees hum faintly from within, oblivious to foxes, crows, and mice lurking beyond. For now, they remain unbroken, watched over by a man who knows their survival is tied to his own. The days crawl on, and with them comes a new anxiety, time itself. You find the candle maker hunched over a tally board scratched with charcoal marks, his fingers tapping in rhythm with the firelight. He isn't counting coins. He's counting days. Each stroke represents another step through the winter, another week closer to spring. He mutters as he traces them, calculating how much food might be left in the hives, how many candles he has left to sell, how many sacks of grain remain in the cellar. His ledger is no parchment of neat numbers, just desperate scratches on wood. Here's your mainstream fact. Medieval beekeepers often measured their year not just by the church calendar but by the life cycles of their hives. Candle demand surged in winter, while bee survival determined prosperity come spring. Keeping time was less about dates and more about survival checkpoints. And here's a quirky tidbit. Some kept track of hive health by tying ribbons or charms around skeps. A red ribbon meant strong bees, a white ribbon meant weak, and black, well, black usually meant dead. It was like medieval color coding, or a very grim sticker chart. The candle maker sighs, staring at the marks. He knows wax prices rise at Easter, but only if he still has bees to supply him come April. He chews his lip, torn between feeding more sugar now or saving it for later. The wrong choice means ruin. Historians still argue whether medieval records of hive numbers were accurate, or whether keepers inflated or downplayed their losses depending on who was asking, lords demanding rent, or neighbors swapping stories. Counting bees was never exact, but tallying them gave a fragile sense of control. The child watches curiously, asking what the marks mean. The candle maker ruffles his hair and says, "They're promises. Promises to the bees, to the family, to himself." He doesn't say that some of those promises might break before spring. And here's a modern aside, this is basically the medieval version of watching your phone battery percentage during a long trip. Every decision, do I open another app, do I dim the screen, becomes survival strategy. Except instead of Netflix, it's thousands of bees. Later that evening, he carries the tally board out to the hives, pressing it against the cold straw as if showing the bees their own scorecard. He whispers that they've made it this far, just a little further to go. The hum inside is faint, steady, alive. He plants the board upright in the snow beside the apiary, a strange marker of time in a frozen field. Each line is a thread pulled through the long fabric of winter, each mark a reminder that endurance is measured not in grand events, but in small, stubborn ticks against the cold. By now the air has shifted, still cold, but not the bone-deep bite of midwinter. The candle maker notices it too. He stands by the hives in the pale morning, rubbing his hands together as though coaxing spring out of the soil. The snow has thinned to patchy crusts, and here and there, little green shoots stab up through the frost. He leans in close to one skep and waits. At first, silence. Then, a buzz louder than before, sharper, more insistent. A single bee pushes through the entrance, wings trembling, body sluggish but determined. It totters into the weak sunlight, circles once, then drops back down into the snow. The candle maker bends low, scoops it up, and places it back by the hive. Here's your mainstream fact. Bees make cleansing flights on the first warm days of late winter. After weeks of being confined, they venture out briefly to relieve themselves and stretch their wings, then hurry back into the hive. Early flights are one of the strongest signs a colony has survived. Now the quirky tidbit. Some keepers claimed to predict spring's arrival based on how high the bees flew during these early outings. Low, sluggish flights meant a lingering winter. High, energetic flights foretold warmth ahead. It's basically the buzzing version of Groundhog Day. The candle maker watches anxiously as more bees emerge, each one buzzing like a miniature herald of life. They stagger in the cold, some falling, some soaring briefly, but all proving the hive's pulse remains strong. He smiles faintly, relief softening the lines of his face. Historians still argue whether keepers should have encouraged early flights or shielded hives to delay them. Too early flights could weaken colonies if sudden frost returned, yet for anxious beekeepers, those first bees were irresistible signs of hope. And here's your modern aside. Picture it like watching your Wi-Fi reconnect after days of outage. The connection is slow, shaky, maybe drops once or twice, but you'd still cheer like you've just won the lottery. That's exactly how the candle maker feels seeing those bees in the air again. The child squeals with delight, clapping as bees buzz unsteadily above the hives. He calls them spring scouts, convinced they're reporting back to the queen about the outside world. The candle maker doesn't correct him, maybe he even believes it a little himself. You step back, watching the scene unfold. The field still looks barren, skeletal trees and muddy snowbanks, but the bees change everything. Their wings cut through silence like threads of gold weaving spring into winter's fabric. The candle maker lifts his eyes to the horizon, as though measuring the distance to warmth. He knows challenges remain, that one late frost could undo months of care. But today, at least, he has proof. The bees are alive, flying, carrying their fragile kingdom forward. And with that, The apiary no longer feels like a graveyard of straw domes. It feels like a nursery waking up, filled with the faint but unmistakable buzz of survival. The days stretch longer now, sunlight lingering a little more each evening, and the candle maker moves through his yard with lighter steps. The hives, once silent fortresses buried in snow, have begun to buzz in earnest. You can hear it before you even reach the apiary, a steady, vibrant drone that thrums against your chest like a drumbeat of life. He bends to lift the lid of one skep, cautious but eager, and peers inside. Bees swarm across the combs, golden bodies shimmering as they hurry about their business. The air is thick with warmth and movement, a miniature city rebuilding itself after months in hiding. He smiles, though lines of fatigue still linger on his face. Every hum, every flutter, is proof his winter work was worth it. Here's your mainstream fact: spring survival wasn't guaranteed. Many medieval hives perished over winter, leaving beekeepers scrambling to rebuild by catching wild swarms or buying colonies. Those who brought their bees through to spring were not just lucky, they were skilled, disciplined, and, perhaps, blessed. And now the quirky tidbit: some keepers celebrated surviving bees by leaving bowls of ale near the hives to toast their endurance. Whether the bees partook or the keepers drank it themselves remains a mystery, but you can imagine a tipsy cheer in the fields as the first true buzzing of spring began. Historians still argue whether winter beekeeping was more survival instinct or ritual theater, whether feeding, fumigating, and whispering to hives truly made a difference, or whether bees endured mostly on their own. But either way, the traditions bound human and insect in a fragile alliance, one that lit candles in chapels and spread honey on bread. The child dances between the skeps, laughing as bees zip past, fearless now that the air is warmer. He calls to his father, insisting the bees are happy because he told them stories all winter. The candle maker chuckles, not denying it. Maybe words matter. Maybe kindness echoes in wings. And here's your modern aside: think of this like keeping your sourdough starter alive for months, feeding it, checking it, whispering encouragement only to watch it finally bubble over with new life. The relief, the pride, the weird emotional bond, it's all the same, just with more buzzing. The candle maker runs a hand over the straw dome, murmuring thanks. His bees have survived. Soon they'll fly across meadows, sip from blossoms, and refill the combs with honey and wax. Soon his candles will burn bright again, traded in market stalls, glowing in homes and churches alike. For now, though, he lingers in the cool morning, surrounded by sound. Not the silence of snow, nor the anxious whisper of winter checks, but the glorious hum of bees stretching their wings, promising warmth, abundance, and light. As the season tilts toward spring, you find yourself standing in a field no longer hushed by frost but awakened by hums. The bees have survived. The candle maker has endured. And together, through patience, superstition, and care, they have carried light from the depths of winter into the promise of another year. The hives no longer sit like silent tombs. Instead, they glow with subtle life, each one a vessel of resilience, each one humming with quiet victory. You picture the candle maker resting now, shoulders finally eased, knowing his work has not been in vain. The bees that once clustered tightly against death now spill into the air, weaving sunlight into the cold, their tiny bodies shimmering as though dipped in gold. The village will soon be filled with honeyed sweetness and the soft glow of wax candles. Chapels will blaze with Easter light, homes will smell of warm bread, and in some quiet corner, a child will grin proudly, still convinced his whispered stories carried the bees through. Let the sound of that hum stay with you, the gentle vibration of countless wings moving in harmony, proof that even the smallest lives can outlast the harshest cold. Feel it soften the edges of your thoughts, like wax melted into a warm flame. Breathe slowly now, the way the candle maker must have breathed each time he pressed his ear to the hive. Imagine the bees inside, clustered close, whispering their soft chant of survival. That chant is steady, constant, reassuring. And as you drift toward sleep, let the buzz fade into silence, carrying you gently with it.